Well, welcome once again to another in the series of practical business owner ideas. My name is Kurt Geldner. I'm with Stearns Financial Group, and I work in the business owner services area and work with business owners directly to help them learn how to exit, learn how to accelerate, and have access to all sorts of fundamental and wonderful things to help their business. And today, I am extremely excited. Lisa, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the way we were introduced. So we were introduced through a networking organization, and one of the people on our team, and it was intriguing to me because I've had a lot of conversations with business owners about a topic that they typically don't think about, right? And that is, what kinds of risks do I have in my business that I'm not prepared for should they happen? And Lisa and I went to lunch, and she was explaining some of the things that she does in her daily job, if you will. But all the things, I was so excited about the fact that, I'd had conversations with business owners, and now I found somebody that could help. But today's conversation is going to be a really great one. We're going to talk about risk. We're going to talk about insurance. Sometimes those two don't go together. So I'm going to let Lisa talk a little bit about, how those two things work together. We're going to talk about the importance of really understanding as a business, what are your needs, right? One of the things that I have learned is that a lot of companies, like I said, at the onset, think that they have a certain profile, but they need someone to help them understand better, whether or not that's the right profile enough. And I know we could all talk about some horror stories, and we might have a conversation a little bit about, what happens if. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is, a topic that I also hear a lot about, which is cyber insurance. And how does cyber insurance fit in the business of business? And so we all have this idea about what does that mean? We have anecdotals, but I'm hopeful that Lisa will take some time and really talk about what she does and how Scott Insurance does that. So with all of that having been said, and we'll talk about assessment too. I think that's one of the other things that I think is pretty important. Lisa, the floor is yours. Tell us about yourself. Tell us about what you do, and tell us a little bit about Scott.
Thanks, Kurt. I appreciate it. So my name is Lisa Prather, and I am with Scott Insurance. And I am on the property and casualty side for risk management. So just to give you a little bit of background about Scott, we're celebrating our 160th year this year. So we have been around. We actually became an ESOP, which is an employee-owned plan. We have employee ownership. We were one of the originating kind of ESOPs back in 1975. So we are headquartered in Virginia. We've got 9 locations in 4 states: North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, and Tennessee. And we focus on both the risk management or the property and casualty side of the house, as well as employee benefits. And we also do surety bonds. So those are kind of our 3 primary areas. One thing that I really love about Scott is it has been fundamental to me in all of my career is I really focus on building long-term relationships with my clients. And Scott has got that same philosophy. And what that allows us to do is really understand what my clients' needs are, my companies, and I can help them more effectively from a strategic perspective, as well as from their business perspective. So sometimes it may not even be something related to insurance, but because I take the time throughout the year to really understand my clients, what their goals are, what their needs are, where they're planning on growing in the short term and long term, that really helps me build out their profile, which helps me really further their strategy as far as effective risk management.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, listen, the concept of, and you've said it already, the concept of insurance and strategy are not typically put together, right? Business owners don't look at their insurance portfolio as a strategic item. And hopefully today, with folks that are listening, that's one of the things that they'll consider, because it is. And you and I had these conversations. I think this is important for anyone listening as well. One of the things that Scott does, which I really think is a fantastic approach, you mentioned getting to know the client better, the strategy, their planning, their goals and objectives, what the future looks like, which is a really big point for business owners. And what are some of the implications there, from a risk perspective? And so, you and I've had this conversation talking a little bit about assessment, how you do it when you come in to talk to a client, and what it is about your process that might be a little bit different than the market. Why don't you just talk a second about that?
Sure. So in the insurance world, one thing that when I first got into the insurance world, I've learned is insurance is based on a renewal date. So if for example, your renewal date is, let's say, June 1st, and I meet you June 10th, and you say, Lisa, I need to move everything to you because, the broker I'm with now does not do anything that I need, for whatever reason. I can actually take it over broker of record, but the other broker's already gotten paid. So we don't really actually take on the full relationship until the next June 1st. So common to the industry, more frequently than not, what I hear from my clients' previous experiences, other brokers will say, okay, well, I will reach out to you next March and see you then. But I see it as that's my opportunity to really spend some time getting to know my clients. It's not a rushed time frame. We're not trying to take it to market at the same time we're learning what the business is about, trying to learn where they're planning on growing and how they're going to grow. It's a much more organic, natural getting to know one another. And that's, again, how it's going to really help us with their relationship. So if I have a client that is maybe only in North Carolina, but next year they're planning on growing to the whole Southeast, then that might affect, well, it will affect their story, but it will also affect their product lines as well as what kind of carriers I want to approach. So is it going to be a local regional carrier or a national carrier? If I have a client that is already kind of all over the country, but now they're thinking about opening a manufacturing site in Germany, that's going to also affect where I go to market and the story that I tell. So that whole knowing our customers from the beginning and then maintaining that relationship throughout the life of that relationship in that company is imperative for me to give the accurate service and relationship and service and products that they need. So one thing that when I'm working with a client, we'll write a narrative to the carriers that we want to approach. And let's say I have a client and I'm going to take it to 20 carriers and say, I write the narrative, which is basically the story of what this company is. If I don't really know them, I could maybe cut and paste from their website, get some generic information and send it to the underwriters. The underwriters at the carriers are completely underwater. They're just overworked. And so what happens is they may have 30 new opportunities that come across their desk. And they're incented to how many they can get through every day. Well, if they've got one that comes through and it's just obviously screenshotted from a website, very minimal information, maybe a paragraph, and there's no context to it, then and there's probably going to be a lot of follow-up questions they'll just put that down to the bottom, or it's a quick decline.
Yeah.
So what's important is really for me to not only know all of those questions that the underwriter is interested in and answer them proactively, but it's also me picking up the phone and talking to them and saying, here's the story, here's where their strengths are, here's some challenges that I can help them with, but this is something we're looking at right now. And really having that dialogue to take away that quick decline. That is going to really move the dial on getting the proper coverage and the most competitive pricing for our clients.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love that journey. I think that journey is one that most, I will just say in my experience, folks in your field are typically not doing. And they're not doing it in a way that sounds like there's a value add here, there's a future value for this. There is a lot of quality involved here. And probably most importantly, there's a whole experiential reason for doing this with your clients, build a relationship. I think that's a fantastic approach. It leads me into asking this question. When we talk about risk solutions and the kinds of, you use the term product, and I know that we use the term product in the space. But let's talk about risk solutions, because at the end of the day, when you sit down and talk to a client, if you've learned their business, you understand their business, and you understand them, and you're thinking about them and how we go forward, what it is you're doing in terms of, providing them a solution, it's a risk solution. Now, one of the things I think that, you and I talked about, I think would be a great moment here is to talk about what a risk solution package might look like, and maybe mention a few of the types of offerings that you have that maybe, I'll use this again, out of the box. They're not usual. There might be a little bit more unusual depending on the type of business you're in. But I'd like the audience to just get a sense of what are some of the unique things and things they might not even consider as a risk-based solution for their business.
Right. Yeah, no, great question. So you're right. Risk management and finding the right risk solutions for a company can look very different. And it's not, the simple solution would go straight to the products and say, okay, you need work comp, you need auto, you need GL, whatever. That's just a simple kind of out of the box thinking. There's a lot of alternatives out in the market today. And so really at Scott, rather than saying, how much insurance can we sell you? We're really looking at a strategic risk approach and say, maybe, you know what, you don't need so much coverage. Take on some of that risk yourself. You can look at if you've got, high frequency of small claims, which many companies do, but they're a couple $100. You don't want to have coverage for that, right? It's more effective and more efficient for you as a company to just keep those risks and retain those yourself. So it's a more in-depth conversation of, we don't want to just take it to policies. One example of an alternative risk financing that we can offer is captives. And so captives is something that Scott has focused on for many years. And captives have been around for 100 years, but they've really kind of come into popularity and had their growth maybe in the last 40 years or so. So just in a nutshell, kind of what a captive looks like is, and again, these are complex solutions that are not a simple, 10-minute discussion, but it is something that is very meaningful and very impactful to the clients where it's a good fit. And I'm talking about group captives. And so they can be homogeneous or heterogeneous, meaning there are some captives that are specific to only companies in the construction industry, or there are some that are heterogeneous. And so there's lots of different industries. There may be some manufacturing companies and some construction companies, and there may be some logistics or distributing and all kinds of companies in there. But the gist of a captive is going to be, it allows each company to serve as one member in that captive, and each member has one voting right. And as a member of that, you're basically taking that opportunity to provide the insurance. You still go to a carrier and get your insurance, but if, let's say we're in a hard market in the auto, and let's say you're in the standard market and your insurance rates are going up in the auto 40%. That may be because there's so many what we call nuclear verdicts, or really large court cases that settle, and there's lots of payments, and the insurance companies are just going through the money to pay these out. So what they're going to do is charge more in premiums across the board. So it has that macroeconomic impact of, okay, everybody, if you haven't had claims, it's going up 40%. If you've had claims, it's going up even more. But a captive eliminates that piece of it. And so it may go up 4% instead of a 40% if you're in a captive, for example, because they're not going to have all of that to continue to consider. It's going to be who is in that captive. You may have 35 members or 35 companies in it. And if they're all performing great, there's no reason for their rates and premiums to go up. So that allows those companies in the captive to actually really contain their costs and have more control.
Yeah.
So one of the big impacts that, of course, everybody loves with captives is when you're paying your premium and you don't have any claims and they go up 40%, the carriers are going to make that profit, right? So they're not going to give you money back. That's what you pay. But in a captive, that they pay those profits to the members, which are again the companies. So we actually get to hand checks to our clients, which does not happen in the standard market.
That's a nice problem. Yeah.
Yes, it's a fabulous way of doing business, and it really incents the people in the captives to take control, implement safety procedures and policies, and really move the dial because they get that direct reward back. So it's a great concept.
Well, and let me just summarize for folks that may have, not had a chance to dig into everything you said. So these are niche-based markets, captive markets that use insurance carriers to basically design and define a set of insurance products for this niche. So you use the example of construction companies, right? Let's use a construction company. So a captive then provides the member with access to the insurance services at a rate that's effectively, I won't call it negotiated, but it's effectively the value that the group has. And at the end, after everybody's paid what they're paying, any profits out of the cost of those things come back to the individual members as a pro rata share of what's left.
Yeah. So a couple of things thank you for restating that I wanted to highlight that I forgot to mention. First of all, in captives, we're talking about only 3 product lines. So it's going to be work comp, general liability, and auto. So only those 3 lines. The other thing is, I just wanted to mention is each member is still going to have their own premium dollar amount that they pay, because obviously each company is different. They have different size. They may have a different fleet of vehicles, et cetera. So that's going to be, individual to that company. But generally speaking, it's going to be, better pricing from a premium perspective. So yes, that's good. And then another thing I just wanted to kind of mention on that subject of the captives is some keys to getting into a captive are going to be size. So generally speaking, kind of a rule of thumb, and there's various captives that are different sizes and different minimums, but the minimum premium in those 3 lines for work comp, general liability, and auto is generally speaking going to be about $200,000. So annually. So if a company is not paying that much at this time, they may not qualify. Now, there's some captives that are 150,000 starting points, so it does fluctuate. It's not hard and fast that number, but generally speaking, it's going to be around there. And also you'll get those dividends back after there's a 3-year lag. So you're kind of putting into it for 3 years, and then you start to see that roll back, which is a longer conversation, but so I'll just leave it at that for right now. And it's because captives, another thing that's key with them is it's a very long-term view. So this is something that your ownership is committed to. They really want to have that control over their company, their risk, and their outcomes. And so with that, it's not really a good fit as much for public companies or private equity owned companies, because if you think about it, those types of companies, they're short-term sighted, right? They've got their quarterly earnings they've got to get out. They're not looking at something that is going to have, maybe 5 years before you start seeing the hundreds of thousands of dollars impact.
Well, and basically it comes back to one of our first comments, and that's a different set of strategic goals, right? Even though companies are, they're structured differently, those are a different set of strategic goals. And this might not be a great fit for everybody, but fundamentally, a business owner, and tell me if I'm wrong here, a business owner would look at this if they have the premium base, if their goals are lower their costs effectively, provide something that they know they're going to get a return on over time, and is basically an area of their peers. I'm assuming that they probably get some connective value out of this too, would be my guess in some way. Yes. So I think a tool like this is fantastic. And I think, this is one of the things I wanted to bring out today. So this is just one tool, in your belt, if you will, But when you sit still and think about some of the areas of the things that you offer, maybe just describe a few of the very unique types of policies or, services that you put in place, in your careers thus far, maybe just some ideas. And the reason is because I want people listening to say, I didn't know that people could do that. I didn't know an
Right.
insurance company could do that. What, right? Those are the kinds of things, if you've got a couple of those.
Sure. So, and these aren't necessarily unheard of, but I will tell you, especially in kind of the small to mid-sized companies range, people feel like, oh, I don't need that. It's not going to happen to me. Prime example is cyber insurance. So I can't begin to tell you, it's not a matter of if you get hit by cyber, it's just a matter of when.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that for a little detail. So yeah, I want to go back to that for sure.
So I just wanted to mention that as kind of the big obvious elephant in the room, but we'll, like you said, touch on that a little bit later. But some other things that I have conversations with people, and again, it's just raising that awareness in the front end, because insurance is oftentimes something that people know they have to have. They don't want to deal with it. They want to have a minimal conversation and then move on to something else. So it's important to really, I feel like I raise a lot of awareness to so many people. So one is EPL or EPLI. We use acronyms as everybody. So that is Employee Practices Liability Insurance. And so that is basically if somebody at your company, an employee, is going to sue you for something. So that may be sexual harassment. That may be if you've got an office coordinator or receptionist and you say, oh, you're going out to lunch, can you stop by the bank and make this deposit, and you keep doing that, they're not getting, that's their 30 minutes off, and now you're making them do work. That can be a potential lawsuit. Directors and officers insurance, that is imperative. I know I serve on lots of different nonprofit boards. Corporate boards are the same way. It's imperative for both of those. I will not join a board. I don't care their size if they don't have D&O coverage, because what can happen is if you give any kind of guidance or approval or anything to do with that business, which is what you're there for, and an individual does not agree with that outcome, then they can sue the individuals on the board and they can go after your personal assets. So not only is it important for you serving on the board, but your whole family is at risk. So yeah, absolutely important to get that. And then some other things that, along with directors and officers, is errors and omissions. So if you think about, doctor practices, they have medical malpractice, right? Well, that's basically a subsector of the E&O. So professional services. So like if you are an engineering firm, or if you're an accounting firm or a law firm, anybody that gives advice, guidance, and counsel, or has that expertise, if they make a mistake, they can actually be sued for that too. And so let's say, you're an engineer and you build bridges, and, oh, well, yeah, I made a mismeasurement. Now the bridge is all, falling apart. That's going to be big. And as you know, I mean, here in the United States, we are a very litigious society. And so those are big coverages that oftentimes, if you don't have them, especially, can lead to lawsuits that can ruin your business. Yeah, and it's especially painful when it's generational businesses that have done so well for so long, and then they just get hammered with something that it's a gap.
Yeah, I think those are three great examples. We're going to get on the fourth here, which was the first. But I think I think the things that particularly with some of the governmental observations now in business, like FinCEN and some of the other things that they're doing, and the focus on governance and how important it is, and with the SEC and a lot of the things that they're doing, saying that and even our own Secretary of State. The local laws are so effectively, and they can be very punitive in big picture problems like the ones you're describing, a board that makes bad decisions, and leaving something out of a document somehow that creates, huge, sets of liability. And then the last thing, I think this employee lawsuit thing is just such a huge conversation. It's not right for every company, but I love these ideas. And I think, as people are listening, this is the kind of thing I hope they take away, so that, if they have a question that sounds like, what do I do now? they pick the phone and they call, right? And that is, I think, one of those moments, having worked with a lot of attorneys, and I know many of us and those listening have had that opportunity as well. Attorneys have, there's no slight on attorneys, but they definitely have an approach. Their approach is to be as forthright, litigious as they can be. You're paying me to be a winner, right? A lot of times that's a very costly thing. And so at the end of the day, great stuff there. Let's talk about cyber. Let's talk. And actually, I want you said it's not an if, it's a when. That's a very strong comment related to something that we all kind of know. Let me throw an anecdotal out there, and let me lead with this, and then you fill in the blanks on cyber and what you guys do. And I think that's important. A friend of mine is a very well respected orthopedic surgeon. He's a spinal surgeon. And his firm was hacked, and they were held ransom. And basically it cost them a tremendous amount of money to get their data back. And they were under the impression that they had that their IT systems were really in great shape, and they weren't going to have this problem. But the thing that I want the folks listening to this that haven't experienced that kind of an IT problem, it was one person opening an email that looked like it was something sent directly to them that cost the company all of this. So it isn't one of those things that somebody nefariously said, I'm just going to load something in here to it was a complete and utter accident, right?
Yeah.
And so, having said that, guess what? How do you guard against these accidents? What do you do? So
right.
Anyway, what do you think?
So it's interesting, and I'll tell you, I have this conversation probably at least weekly. One challenge, I'm actually working with a client right now, and they say, we know we need to get cyber insurance. We don't have it. This is a company that's already in 28 states. So they're not just some, small startup. They've been around for a while, don't have any coverage. And they say, well, the application is just too hard to fill out. I don't understand it. And so we've had a conversation at Scott. We have specialists in our risk performance group team that help on many, many fronts, from safety perspective, risk mitigation, all kinds of things like that. But we have one particular individual that's actually in my office, and all he does is cyber. And it's something that is always constantly evolving. And so it requires that diligence with it and attention to it. So we are actually working, with this client to help, kind of walk them through. Generally speaking, when you're filling out a cyber application, it is required that either your internal IT director fill it out, right, or you have a third party fill it out, because it is complex. And right, the reason is because it is a technical kind of a coverage, and we need to understand what processes, what procedures, what technology you've got in place. And so that's kind of why it is a little challenging. But I want to put a little bit of perspective onto these cases, because there's so many different cases. And I can give you a quick example. In the construction space especially, I've had so many companies that say, we don't have anything, we don't keep people's personally identifiable information, we're not in healthcare, we don't do this and that, we don't need it, nobody wants my information. Well, construction was actually targeted a couple of years ago because of that exact reason. It's such an easy way to infiltrate. What can happen is, and this is actually, some of you may be familiar with this, it's a story of when big Target, a few years ago, they're building new stores all the time. They're putting in new products and whatnot. And so they had, if you know, Kurt, when you're walking down a grocery store and the lights light up as you're going, yep, down the aisle, it saves the lighting expense all the time. Well, there was a HVAC company putting in some of that technology, and that one store and that one HVAC company, the HVAC company actually got infiltrated, cyber attack, didn't know it, and they hooked into Target's system, and the entire global Target corporation was then infiltrated. It was huge. And so, you have to have that mindset of, it's not just you, it's everybody you touch. And if
Great
it,
point.
and if it's not your information that maybe you're concerned with, it's others that you touch. But from your perspective, like if you're a construction company and your information gets compromised, it could go to, well, obviously the front page of the newspaper, but also your competitors. So when you're putting bids out, competitive bids, it knows, you can actually have that information taken to a competitor, and it can basically just annihilate your
Yeah.
competitive edge. So
Right.
there's a lot of different ways. I pulled some kind of numbers just to give you an idea too, from a cyber perspective. So there's ransomware, which is, like you said, so you walk in and you get on your computer and you get a black screen, and all of a sudden every computer in your company goes black and it says, you are being held ransom. You have to pay out, an amount. So this is specific to small and medium sized businesses. The top 5 numbers of claims, ransomware had 432,000. Business email compromise, which is if they get a hold of your email address and they act like there's somebody else, 101,000. Hackers, 78,000, which is one of the lowest, which is surprising because, to your point, it's not always like the big rings, fraud rings that are going in and doing it. There's a lot of volume. There's wire transfer fraud, had 167,000, and then staff mistakes, 33,000. So staff mistakes are that human component. There's always, people count on that,
Yeah.
People
Right.
will try to infiltrate your system the day after Thanksgiving because they know the normal people, you may have some cyber processes in place to prevent wire transfer fraud, but they know the regular person's on vacation that day. So now you got a backup person, and you get this, time sensitive email from the CEO of the company when it's not really the CEO saying, oh, we need to wire this money. We need it as soon as possible. There's that sense of urgency. And they don't want to get in trouble. They're just substituting, and they don't want to get in trouble with the owner of the company. So they change the routing number. It happens. It still happens all the
Yep.
time. And it's out there. So be
Yeah.
aware.
Yeah. Well, listen, I know our time is coming to a close here, but I could go on listening to this stuff for some period of time. And the reason is because I think you bring out just some fascinating points about what the possible calamities are. And that's not a good term to use, but it's true. These are calamities, right? Back to your point about some of these areas that just have
Yes.
devastating effects on a business. So it's really, really important. And I think as we close, I think one of the things I'd like for you to do, if you wouldn't mind, is really just summarize a little bit, maybe just take folks down the path of what Scott does and how that the value of these kinds of things, how you guys look at this stuff, how you can help, and maybe just touch a little bit on that as we close.
Sure. So yeah, it's so important to have a strong relationship with your risk advisor. And I just firmly believe in that. And so if, for example, we were talking earlier about those kind of coverages that you may not know about, the EPLI, the DNO, the ENO, and the cyber, et cetera. Those are conversations that I have with my clients, and they may say, you know what, I understand, but I'm not ready, or I can't do it right now. That's okay. We can talk about it. I want you to know about it. I want you to know the importance of it and make that intentional decision. And it may not be something you can do right now. And it may be something that we have to work towards for next year. For cyber, if you don't have that multi-factor authentication, and maybe you're working on it right now, your rate is going to be just astronomical if you don't have that. So let's get you set up with that, or let's get you a third-party technical expert, to help your company. Those are things that I do throughout the year, and everybody at Scott does. So it takes time to build these relationships and to have that economic impact to the bottom line of our companies. It's not something that you can just do 90 days before a renewal date. And so that's the biggest thing that I can say makes just a recurring impact to our clients. And that's why they don't leave. We have over a 96% retention rate, because the work that we do throughout the year is so paramount to having that successful renewal period. But also, I mean, let's face it, we're in the business, the hope it never happens business. But if it does happen, you want to make sure you're with somebody that's knowledgeable and has you protected so you can sleep well at night.
Well, I think that is a great closure to this. We're in the hope it doesn't happen business, right? I love that. I love that line. That's
Yeah.
sounds like a tagline. I'm kidding. I know it's a tagline somewhere. Anyway, listen, first of all, thank you so much for your time today. I know that the audience has gotten some real value out of this. Anybody who's listened this long is probably asking themselves, what is it that I don't know? And I think that's, that's the headline of this podcast.
Yes.
Knowing what you don't know or not knowing what you don't know, either way, you can have a problem if you're not doing something about it. So I want to end there, and I want to say thank you very much for your time. Look forward to more opportunities to work with you, and thanks again.
All right. Thanks, Kurt. Thank you, everybody.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we just had a great conversation about paying attention to the risk in your business. And I think one of the things that you should take away from this is if you don't know it, you need to ask someone. And I know that Lisa is certainly willing and able to help. And so anyone who has a question, we'll include Lisa's contact information. Please reach out to her. And I know they're happy to help. And we really appreciate your time today. And so we're signing off from the Practical Business Owner Ideas series. You all have a wonderful day. We'll talk soon.